When the automatic door slid open that morning, no one really noticed the man who walked in wearing a faded jacket and a cap pulled low over his eyes, hands stuffed in his pockets. Just another customer, right? But that man was Mark Reynolds, CEO of the entire chain of stores named Reynolds Market. He stopped, eyes slowly scanning the sales floor, and what he saw wasn't the thriving business he'd built, it was something else entirely. Shelves were messy, customers moved like ghosts, and the usual buzz of greetings and laughter was nowhere to be found. It felt suffocating, like the life had been drained out of the place. Across the checkout counter, a woman was scanning items. She looked worn down, maybe in her 30s, hair loosely tied back, eyes red and swollen. She tried to smile at the customers, but her hands trembled, her voice cracked. Mark ducked behind a shelf, pretending to check the canned goods, but he saw her wipe away tears with her sleeve. Right there, in the middle of her shift. Then the manager stormed out, barking orders like a drill sergeant, sharp, harsh. Mark felt a sinking certainty. Something was very wrong here. Mark Reynolds wasn't just some anonymous shopper. He was the man whose name and logo hung over these aisles. Reynolds Market used to be his pride and joy. He'd built it on one simple belief: treat your employees right, and they'll treat customers well. That philosophy took him from a single store to 18 branches, hundreds of employees. But lately, customer complaints were piling up, shelves stayed empty, staff were irritable, and an anonymous letter had landed on his desk claiming mistreatment within his own company. The regional directors shrugged it off. Just lazy staff, they said. Mark wasn't convinced. When that many people feel injustice, something rotten's growing under the surface. He walked slowly down the aisles. No chatter, no smiles, no "how are you today?" Customers shuffled silently. Employees avoided eye contact. The dairy section was a disaster. The bread shelf had torn packages, and a promotional sign was leaning against a trash bin, ignored. In produce, a single onion had rolled to the floor, shriveled and forgotten. Back when he started this company, the staff would line up to greet customers every morning, and managers made sure everything smelled fresh, looked bright, was orderly. Now the air smelled stale of old coffee and exhaustion. Mark's fists clenched in his coat pockets. This wasn't laziness or burnout. This was a team that had given up. Suddenly a voice cut through the silence like a slap. Crying on shift again? How many times do I have to tell you, if you can't keep it together, quit? Mark whipped around. Troy Matthews, the supervisor, stood there, face flushed, slamming a clipboard on the counter. The woman, Lisa, froze, swallowed hard, quickly wiping away tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice shaking. "I'll be fine." Troy sneered. "You've already taken 2 days off this month. Don't be surprised if you lose your next shift." No one stepped up. No one said a word. Mark stood hidden, chest tightening. This was intimidation, plain and simple. Not the leadership he believed in. Troy stormed off, leaving the air thick with tension. Lisa forced herself upright. "Thank you," she said mechanically to a customer, but her hands still trembled, her voice barely steady. Mark watched her, pretending to adjust cans, but his eyes stayed glued to her. She didn't yell or fight back, just braced herself not to fall apart in front of everyone. When the crowd thinned, she leaned against the counter, clutching her uniform, lips pressed tight like she was holding back a storm. Mark felt a sharp sting in his chest. It wasn't anger anymore, it was pain. What kind of burden broke this woman down in the middle of a workday, but didn't stop her from showing up anyway? He moved to the snack aisle, still pretending to look for something, but he noticed everything. The sideways glances, the tense body language, the unnatural silence that didn't belong in a store. A young guy stubbed his toe on a stray pallet. No one asked if he was okay. An elderly customer waited at the counter for nearly 3 minutes. No one helped. At Frozen Goods, a female employee shook as she reached up to change a price tag, breathing heavy as if just standing was a battle. Mark realized this wasn't just about a bad manager or a failing store. This was a broken team, worn out, beaten down, no longer believing their work mattered. His breath hitched. This went far deeper than he thought. He remembered the letter again, that brown envelope with no return address. lines scrawled across it. Someone in the store is being pushed to the edge. You should look into it before it's too late. At the time, the directors laughed it off. Probably a kid sulking because they didn't get a raise. Mark stayed quiet, but now he knew. That letter was a cry for help, and he was the only one with power to fix this. Later, during a break, Mark followed the sound of quiet sobbing to the break room door. Inside, Lisa was there, voice barely a whisper between gasps. I can't do this anymore. I really tried, but nothing's ever enough. They cut my hours. I can't pay for gas. My rent's late. Another voice, softer, probably the young employee from Frozen Goods, said, Troy's coming after me too. Anyone with kids or who asks for time off, he punishes them. Lisa's tears fell harder. I didn't skip shifts because I was lazy. My son had an asthma attack. I begged Troy, but he said I wasn't trustworthy. Mark stood frozen, her words slicing right through him. This was the nightmare he never wanted for his company. A place built on fairness was crushing people instead. As Lisa left later that night, Mark followed at a distance, watching her shuffle slowly, clutching a worn-out bag, shoulders shaking. She stopped by her old sedan, rummaged through an almost empty wallet, shaking loose a handful of coins, trembling as she stared at them. Then she collapsed in tears in the empty parking lot. Mark stayed still, the night wind cutting through his thin coat, but he felt no cold, only the weight of what he'd just witnessed. He realized he didn't need more proof. This wasn't a broken system by accident, it was deliberate. The next day, Mark came back, this time undercover as a part-time employee, a newbie stocking shelves. No one noticed him or greeted him, and that was the point. Next to him was Marcus, a sharp young guy who quietly explained the harsh new shift policies. Troy cuts hours for anyone with kids or personal stuff. But if you stay quiet, you get extra hours. Mark asked about Lisa. Marcus's face fell. She's the hardest worker here, but since her kid's asthma attack, Troy's been after her, cutting her down to just 15 hours a week. Not enough to cover rent or medicine. Mark's grip tightened. He'd seen those numbers in staffing reports, signed off thinking it was efficiency, never realizing it was slicing up families. That night, taking advantage of a shift change, Mark hacked into the store's scheduling system. The pattern was clear. Employees labeled unreliable had their hours slashed, especially those with real-life struggles. Those close to Troy kept or gained hours. This was no accident. Troy was weaponizing the schedule, bleeding the team dry to polish numbers and look good to corporate. The next afternoon, Mark confronted Troy in his office. Troy looked tired but arrogant, unaware he was about to be exposed. When Mark calmly asked about Lisa's cut hours, Troy scoffed. She's a problem, always missing shifts, blaming her kid. I don't babysit every sob story. Mark held back anger, but made it clear, cutting a mother's hours because her child is sick, that's not management. That's cruelty. Troy admitted, it gets me praise from corporate. Costs go down. Mark realized this man ran operations with calculated cruelty, rewarded for breaking people, not supporting them. Mark left the office, rage simmering. His company name, his legacy, was now tied to exploitation. He took a deep breath, called his assistant. Cancel all my meetings tomorrow. I'm heading to store number 7. Not as CEO, but as the man who needs to make it right. That night, Mark sat in a cheap hotel room, surrounded by notes and employee names, thoughts drifting to his early days scrubbing floors, promising himself he'd never let this happen. But now Lisa's face kept haunting him, a woman beaten down, still standing. The next morning, Mark returned, not disguised anymore, wearing a crisp suit and his CEO badge. The atmosphere shifted the moment he walked in. Employees froze, some eyes widened. Lisa caught his gaze, realizing this wasn't the undercover worker anymore. Mark headed straight for Troy, who was engrossed in his clipboard, oblivious to the storm coming his way. Good morning, Mark said, voice calm but sharp. Troy looked up, confused. Mark showed his badge, CEO Mark Reynolds. Troy's confident smirk vanished, replaced by panic as everyone watched silently. Mark laid it out. I heard everything. Saw everything. We need to talk about how you treat my people. Troy stammered, tried excuses, But Mark cut through coldly, cutting a mother's hours because her son is sick that's not keeping the store running. The employees stopped, the tension palpable. Mark told Troy, "I didn't come to argue. I came to take back the keys." Troy handed them over, defeated, muttering about soft workers and coddling. Mark stared him down. "They've been working under a weight you'll never understand." Turning to the stunned staff, Mark called for a meeting in the break room. No one questioned him. They just followed. He stood before them, no podium, no fanfare, and said, "I founded Reynolds Market, and I failed you. You deserve respect. I've seen what's been happening, and, starting today, that changes. I want one of you to help me lead that change." He looked at Lisa. "Would you step up as assistant manager?" The room fell silent, disbelief heavy in the air. Lisa's eyes darted around like he'd made a mistake, but she nodded, voice shaky. "I'll try." Mark smiled warmly. "Don't try. You've already done it." Lisa sat in Troy's old office later, looking at the manipulated schedules, back-to-back shifts, impossible hours, no respect for family needs. She realized Troy didn't just hurt her, he hurt them all. She tore up the old plan and started fresh, typing slowly, deliberately. Prioritize single mothers, assign consistent shifts, limit consecutive nights, accommodate classes and family duties. At the bottom, "If you have concerns, come to me. My door is always open." That afternoon, she called a staff meeting. The mood was cautious but hopeful. She apologized for her silence and promised, "Starting today, you have the right to speak up. No one should have to choose between a job and their family." A single clap broke the silence, then another not loud, just a collective breath of relief. Change had begun. In the days that followed, small signs appeared. Marcus helped an elderly woman find something in frozen foods. Linda smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks while restocking fruit. Lisa moved through the aisles holding her head high. Mark watched quietly, knowing real change shows in the way people hold themselves and how their feet hit the floor. 1 week later, Mark returned quietly, no fanfare, no entourage. The store gleamed, shelves full, and the air felt different. Marcus helped the customer. Linda chatted warmly. Lisa knelt handing a sticker to a little girl. Mark smiled, not forced, but real. The best leadership, he thought, is the kind that steps away and leaves the place better than before. At checkout, Lisa saw him and blinked, surprised. "Didn't think you'd stop by today." Mark nodded softly. "I didn't think I'd see this so soon." She looked down, shy. "I'm just trying to do the right thing. Some days I panic. Some days I almost gave up." Mark's gaze softened. "You didn't give up. You claimed this chance every time you stood back up." She paused, eyes red, voice quiet. "I used to think I was just replaceable." He shook his head. "You're the reason I believe this company is worth fighting for." No slogans, no music, just two people shaped by different battles, standing together. That evening, Lisa taped a sheet above her desk. Schedules exist to support, not punish. Listen first. Adjust later. Every hour worked is part of someone's life. Never let anyone cry out of fear of losing their job. Good people don't need control, just trust. She looked in a mirror, tired, yes, but unbroken. The store closed for the day. Lisa flipped off the lights and stepped outside, filling her tank at the gas station. This time, her wallet wasn't empty. Her hands didn't shake. She looked back at her son sleeping peacefully in the car, a quiet smile spreading across her face, not because she earned a title, but because she refused to give up. Sometimes, real change begins by listening to one person. Sometimes the strongest one is the one who breaks down mid-shift, but shows up the next morning anyway. If you saw yourself in this story, drop a single dot in the comments. We're listening.